Prologue. Rufford Hall, Nottinghamshire, February 1816. Gregory, Baron Avery, offered his younger brother Tristan a glass of whisky. "It's been so nice having you home again." The golden liquid reflected the roaring fire, just a few feet away in the hearth. "Phoebe insisted." Tris accepted the glass with a nod, and a smile that said better than words ever could, the concern that he and his wife obviously had for Greg. "Why don't you come back to Norfolk with us, before we head to London? Change of scenery might be just what you need." But they both knew Greg wouldn't leave Rufford Hall. After all, he rarely did, preferring surroundings that did not change to those that did. "Who says I need anything?" Greg asked, returning to his study sideboard to pour himself a drink as well. "It takes quite a lot of time and effort keeping the hall running smoothly. Not that you or Russ would understand that." As soon as his younger brothers were able, they'd purchased their army commissions and departed for one adventure after another on the continent. Greg didn't begrudge either of his brothers the freedom they'd found along the way. Such was life for younger brothers. But Greg was the peer, the one tasked with running the Avery barony and its holdings, which he quite enjoyed actually. Mending his tenants' roofs, overseeing the harvest, maintaining the glory of Rufford Hall, it was all rather calming in a way. And purpose. It gave him a purpose, and kept his mind occupied. "I do," Tristan said, making Greg splash more whisky than he'd intended into his glass, and subsequently onto the sideboard. "This place is like a bloody mausoleum." Greg's head jerked towards his brother, and he frowned. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "You know what I mean by that." Tristan heaved a sigh, concern etched across his brow. "She's dead, Greg, and with the way you live, you might as well have climbed into that coffin right beside her." She, her. Tristan would never say Marina's name. No one ever did. And though no one had ever said Greg didn't have a right to mourn her, she had been, after all, another man's wife. He knew they all thought so quietly. But he didn't have a choice in the matter. He'd loved Marina with all of his heart, and with her passing, so too went all of his youthful carefree days, the light-heartedness that had at one time been so much a part of who he was. Even though he'd come to realize that Marina wasn't the sweet girl he'd once believed her to be, her death, and the death of their daughter, had forever changed him. "Look." Tristan placed his glass on the table beside his chair. "I can never repay you the debt that Phoebe and I owe you, Greg." His voice cracked with emotion, as though he was reliving the very moment Greg and Phoebe had found Tristan the previous year, the very moment they'd stopped him from fleeing the country and ruining his only shot at true happiness. "But I'm trying my hardest, and you're making it damn difficult to return the favour." Was that what this was about? Another "it's time you got on with your life" speech from one of his siblings? "I'm happy where I am, Tris." He lifted his overfilled glass to his lips and drank a healthy amount from the top. "You can lie to yourself if you want, Greg." Tristan's green Avery eyes stared a hole straight into his soul. "But you can't lie to me. I remember what you said to me that day, the morning I left. I'll never forget it." And that was the problem with bearing one's soul to one's brother. They tended to remember every word you said, and would use it against you when it suited them. "Tris," he began. But Tristan shook his head, his mind clearly made up. "You were young. You made a mistake. You shouldn't have to pay the rest of your life for it. You're a good man, a decent one, no matter how you see yourself, and you have every right to a happy life." "My life is happy," Greg stressed, even though that wasn't entirely true. No amount of tending to his holdings would fill the empty cavity in his chest, though he was not about to say those words aloud. Tristan snorted. "Happy? Her ghost haunts each step you take, like a spectre floating around you day and night, not willing to let you go." "I had no idea you had such a flair for the dramatic," Greg drawled, hoping he didn't seem as exposed as he felt under the keen eye of his brother's observation. "When is the last time you looked in a mirror, Greg?" "This morning." Tristan's eyes narrowed, silently accusing Greg of being petulant. "When is the last time you truly took a good look at yourself?" He sighed warily. "You didn't die with her. It's all right for you to live, you know." If he didn't know his brother's heart was in the right place, Greg would have been tempted to toss his whiskey at Tristan's head. Even still, it was almost impossible to keep the growl from his voice when he replied, "I breathe in air same as you every day." "But it's not the same as me." Tristan frowned. "It's not the same, and you know it. You know it because you loved her. You were whole, and your heart was alive, and—" "Don't tell me what is in my heart, Tristan. Only I know what's there." "And what is there?" his brother asked, his eyes steady and unwavering as he studied Greg's face. Damn Tristan and his blasted honour. It would be so much easier to be standing there, looking at Russell with all of his flaws. So much easier to tell their less than honourable brother to go hang. But with Tristan, well, Greg couldn't tell him what was in his heart. It had been so long since he'd felt it. But he'd be damned before he admitted as much to his youngest brother. When it became apparent he had no intention of answering the question, Tristan pushed out of his chair and sidled over toward Greg. "I'll make you a deal." "A deal?" he echoed, his eyes narrowing just a bit. Tristan nodded. "Spend this upcoming season in London, just this once, and I'll never mention it again." "London?" he spat, as though it was a foul word. "London," Tristan nodded. "Cordy will be there, and with her recent loss she could use all of our support. She puts on a brave face, like she always has, focusing on one project or scheme or another, but she's completely devastated, Greg." Of course their sister was devastated. She'd been so happy at the prospect of having another child, but that apparently wasn't to be. Still, Greg was the last person whose support she needed. "As Clayworth is not terribly fond of me, I don't know how much good I would do for her." "Clayworth loves her more than life. He won't push you away. He knows how happy she would be if you came to town." "To even endure my presence?" Greg asked, and a self-deprecating laugh escaped him. "He never loved Marina," Tristan said, and hearing her name spoken aloud, after all these years, nearly made Greg's knees buckle from the weight of it. "So perhaps we can all put the past behind us and move forward together, if not for ourselves, then for Cordy's sake. She loves and needs you both." Unshed tears stung Greg's eyes, but he refused to let even one measly tear stream down his face in Tristan's presence. He couldn't find his voice to reply, so he simply nodded instead. London, of all the damned places. He could go the rest of his life without setting foot in that bloody city. Still, he would go if his presence could somehow lighten his sister's heartache. After all, Cordy, sweet, devoted Cordy, whom he should have taken better care of in her youth, was the last person who deserved heartache. She cared about everything and everyone, up to and including him, whether he was worthy of her concern or not. "I have been meaning to stock my stables," he conceded. "It wouldn't hurt to look over horseflesh at Tattersall's, I suppose."